Welcome to another episode of the Alley Report. Today we're talking to Jonathan Duckworth, author of the collection Have You Seen the Moon Tonight? And his short stories have been in Antifa Splatterpunk, Texas Roadkill, and a ton of other places. Um, and yeah, thanks for being on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I know you are you're good with horror because I think you live in Denton, so you have to navigate I-35. So
Yeah, and also under construction, I just paid, speaking of horror, I just paid $250 for faculty parking at UNT, just to find out that one of the main faculty parking lots is surrounded by construction um, for the foreseeable future. So
at
that's
the,
fun.
at that point you expect to like see like just like an old woman like laughing in the corner and like you've offended her 2 decades ago and this is
Yeah,
her revenge.
yeah. It's construction does not mean here, construction does not mean what it means most places, because most places there's generally an end in sight.
No,
Uh,
they started this when I moved out of Denton, which was 2012. It's still going.
Well, then you were, because I moved in 2019. That's when I moved in. I guess you were there maybe for like the twilight of the glory days of Fry Street then,
Yeah, yeah.
back when Fry Street was still kind of like a hippie commune.
Yep. Like the dying gasps of that era.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Denton's still a really neat, fun, wacky town, but it does feel like it's lost you know, some of that wackiness.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of
It's
seasoned
not Frisco
Texas have
though.
done that. What?
Yeah, it's not Frisco, and that should be like the town's motto. We're not Frisco.
Seriously,
Hey, at
yeah.
least we're not Frisco.
Yeah, I feel like Dallas has been trying to claw back some of its like interesting aspects, like after trying to get rid of them for years.
Well, it's too late for Austin.
Yeah, no, that's unfortunate.
Austin's dead. My
Uh,
apologies to anyone who's from Austin, but you
they
know.
know, they know, they have to know. Like I remember going down there when when I was younger, and it was truly just a weird, strange place, and it is kind of like it's kind of a bummer now.
Where are you at? Because I see in your bio you're from that it says you're in Oklahoma, but where in Oklahoma?
I'm in Shawnee, so I'm about 40 minutes or so east of Oklahoma City.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, Oklahoma City seems cool. I've never been there, but it seems like a neat city.
Oh, they have a skeleton museum. They have the venomous
Yes.
snake museum
My
is
wife
cool.
wants to go there. They also have many employed cats.
Hmm.
There are lots of like I think the skeleton museum has a cat that works there.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah.
Just one of those. I took the kids there, and I was just like, I enjoyed it way more than they did.
Speaking of employed cats, there is an app. I forget what it's called, but there's an app that tells you like what businesses have cats that work there.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, let me like cat employed app search. Yeah, that didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, because
I
instantly, I love the place. It's
just
like
take my word for it, internet. There
I
is
believe you.
a yeah, there it exists.
Um, Also, speaking of like mentioned your collection earlier, I always want to ask that when people assemble collections, like when you went into it, did you go in with like a theme? Did you just have I have all these stories, I'm gonna put them together? Like what was like your approach to like putting your collection together?
I think I can't speak for every writer, but I think a lot of writers probably do this with a collection where you have a sort of like critical mass of stories,
Mhm.
um, that you start realizing I should put a collection together. And then in this case, these were kind of all of the best stories I had. I will say that it arose because I had another collection. This Have You Seen the Moon Tonight was actually the second horror collection I put together. The first collection is still unpublished, and that's a collection called Undying. And that one I actually put together a long time ago, like before I moved to Texas, like 2018, I think. 2018, 2019 is when I put it together. And that one did have like a theme, not really a theme so much as like all the stories were historical horrors in various European
Okay.
countries. Um, so that was the theme. And then like basically this collection arose as all the other stories that I was writing in that time period that didn't belong in Undying because they were not set in
Yeah.
Europe. So these were like this was sort of the American cousin to Undying is how I thought of it. And yeah, I think what happens a lot, what happened in this case was there was not really a plan, and then sort of retroactively I started conceiving of a theme and like, okay, what actually brings these stories together? And the theme was apocalypse, the like the end of the world, the various ends of the world, because I started realizing that like a lot of these stories are different ways that the world might end, sort of like these different threats to the world as we know it. And so that's kind of how it came together.
Okay. Yeah, because I've done some where it's just this is like you said, it was like the era. Like I've wrote these for the first 2 years. So they all belong together,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's random, and sometimes like the random almost feels like a theme. They feel like they come together in a way that works, which is always interesting when that happens.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And also, I think it just goes to show that a lot of what we do as writers is just kind of blundering around, and
Yeah,
then we pretend we had a plan when we didn't.
I feel like that's in
For
all art. Like,
Yeah, yeah, and I think I did have to when I was sending it out, when I was sending the collection out, I did want to emphasize that there was like sort of a thematic unity to it. And when I talk about it, because when I apply for jobs in academia, in like creative writing jobs, this is my one published book that's out there. So I do talk about this book, and I talk about it in terms of like of the theme. So I do pretend that's not like that was a larger consideration than it actually was.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and I know like even in writing like longer work, there's a lot of times where a twist comes up in the story not because I planned the twist, but because I realized, oh, there's these connecting things. I didn't realize they were connecting together, but I'm going to retroactively make that work. And
Mhm.
I've heard other writers talk about that too, where it's like the accidentally like you said, stumbling upon stuff that just makes it seem
Yeah.
like you had it all planned.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing here too is that so all the horror stories I write are part of a shared universe. So all of these stories are like at least loosely linked in the sense that they're all taking place in the same world, and that's true also of the other collection, Undying, and it's true of the third collection, Noctavagans. Um,
Ghost.
no, that was probably a cat.
Oh well, that makes more sense. But
Just in the air condition coming on. Um, yeah. Well, okay.
this is going to be on a TikTok where somebody's like, "Ghost showed up in interview."
Yeah. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Um, yeah. But in all three of them, it's like there's a shared universe, right? And one thing that I like about that is that it gives you sort of, for me, what works with that is that I get a lot of other stories out of previous stories. So each story is the possible seed to another story. The first story, for instance, in this Dark's Last Show, which was also produced as a pseudopod episode. So if any listeners, shout out to Pseudopod, great
Mhm.
podcast. Um, if any of you listeners slash watchers, because I know this is going on YouTube as well, if you're interested, you can check that out. It's a good introduction to the collection. It's the first story in the collection, but that one there's a character who appears very briefly. She's only really mentioned because that story takes place in a strip club in South Beach, in Miami, and there's one of the strippers who gets mentioned like very briefly, Sandy. She ended up being I didn't when I wrote that story, like I didn't think about that at all. Like I didn't think I'd ever go back to that character. She ended up being the main character of a novel that I'm sending out right now. Um, and that actually happens a lot. There's a lot of stories in this ended up being seeds for other stories. Characters ended up appearing in other things, and I don't know. It's helpful not only for generating, but also I feel more comfortable You know, when you go into a room, like into an unfamiliar room, and you feel a little more at ease
Mhm.
because you recognize someone, and it may not even be like a friend. It's just like, oh, I know that person.
Yeah.
Like, and then you feel a little this like, okay, this is a little less threatening. That helps me where like I just have like, okay, I've written this character before. Even if that character was just like a one-line character. And that makes me feel a little more comfortable to approach the sort of, the terror of writing a new story.
Yeah, the fear of the blank page.
Yeah.
And I know as a reader, I always like when I find those connections and stories and collections and things, it almost makes me more invested. I start investigating. I'm looking for the clues and how they connect.
Well,
And
it's like the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV, like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. We're like, hey, I know that, I know that guy. I've seen that guy before.
yeah.
Well,
Um,
it's like, yeah, because I always felt that way with, oh, what's the so Kevin Smith's films,
oh,
The
View
View
Askew.
Askew first. Yeah, like whenever you'll see a reference where, like, even though it's like that's his entire thing, it's always still a delight when you see a reference. Like,
Yeah,
for instance, when you find out that Randall from Clerks, or wait, is that the guy's what is yeah, Randall from Clerks is like Jay from Jay and Silent Bob's cousin.
yeah,
And that's like, and it makes so much sense. Like, oh, of course they're cousins.
yeah. Like,
Yeah,
um, Ghost. Oh,
yeah,
and speaking
Ghost
like
Dad.
the pseudopod, like when having a story on something like that and you get to hear it and it's read out loud, does that
Hmm.
like alter in a way how you approach stories or make you rethink like different things about writing, like hearing it out loud, hearing it in different format?
Well, I mean, maybe the thing is, I've always, since I started writing, I've always conceived of narrative as like little movies in my brain. My approach has always been very audio visual, which isn't to say I don't also do like, all the other things that, because prose is very different from film in the sense that it like affords you insights that you don't get from film. But at the same time, like the basic, I guess, material that I'm working with, like the clay that I'm trying to sculpt, has always been that sort of like very audiovisual approach. And I will say, I've had two stories with Pseudopod, and I've had two stories with Tales to Terrify, also a very good horror audio podcast. And I've had a couple stories that were made into podcasts on Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And all those experiences, they're interesting in that you realize that the voice in your head is not necessarily the voice that's. It's
Yeah,
a good reminder that the voice in your head when you're writing it is not going to be the voice that the reader hears, because the
yeah,
voice of the narrator is not the voice that I had in my head. I will say, John Paget, shout out John Paget, he did when he did Dark/Show on Pseudopod, that was not the voice I had for the character of Devin Dark, but I almost can't hear him in a different voice now.
yeah,
Because he does this thing, because John Paget did this thing. It's almost like Mark Hamill's The Joker. Um,
yeah. You can
it's
only read if
yeah,
you read a comic or something, it's Mark
yeah,
Hamill's Joker now. Like that's the
right,
definitive.
yeah, yeah. No, it's like that where like he did such a good job that like I'm now like every time, and I've written multiple stories with Devin Dark as a character in them now. He's one of my favorite characters to write, and now I'm always hearing it with that kind of John Paget voice. So, yeah, that I think it can, and I think the other thing that you get from something like a hearing your work turned into audio is it's a additional reminder, similar to when you first see, a story printed in a book. It's that reminder this is real.
Yeah,
This is something that it is not just confined to my brain anymore. This is a thing that is out there in the world that is reaching people. So that, and that feels Not to be corny, but that feels transformative,
Yeah, 'cause I mean, well, so much of writing is an isolating experiment experience. You are writing, brainstorming on your own, writing on your own, editing on your own. So like to have the outside world react in any way, it's like, oh yeah, I put something out there. And I think for me it was the first time like I would see reviews for something I wrote pop up on like Goodreads or something, and it's like I have no connection to that person. They don't know me in any way. They don't know anyone I know.
Yeah, and that's been interesting too, because it's like it's one thing when you get a review from someone and you like sent that your book to them, or like they bought your book, and you had a feeling they were gonna write a review, or maybe even ask them to write a review, because we're not proud.
Yeah, no, we gotta do what we gotta do.
Authors are not. We'll beg you for anything,
Mhm.
but it's another thing entirely when someone I've never heard of writes a review and I see that review on Goodreads. And by the way, I stopped looking at reviews on Goodreads because they're not always great.
No,
And I think that the most damning thing though, because like I've seen some really bad ones where like the reviewer is clearly just trying to hurt the author's feeling, which is, weird,
yeah,
messed up, and I think says more about the person writing the review than it does about the thing they're reviewing or the author. Um, but what I will say is actually worse. The thing that really is a dagger to my heart is I'd rather like I'm okay if you say my book is crap. It feels really bad if you were to just say, oh, it was just okay.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
It's like
like
if
yeah,
you,
it was fine. It was okay. It's like, oh
yeah, I had one for one of mine. It's just like it was like nothing. It just said nothing worth reading. And then like that was the title of it, and like the font was
that
just like
that that
nothing.
that actually that feels more like a negative review. I mean, like just like it was okay, but nothing earth shattering, which is like word
Yeah.
for word of something I saw. And I was
Oh,
like, that felt worse than if they had said it was bad or not worth reading.
yeah.
Because I guess I just assume if someone says it's not worth reading, it's like that wasn't the book for them, right? Like this is not the right book for them. Because a lot of people will pick up a book that is actually not right for them. And
Yeah.
actually, I had one a former high school classmate that I wasn't even in touch with, who reached out to me and asked like to buy my book. It was like, oh, that's cool. And then I realized that he was going to give it to his like nephew, who was like
Oh
10, and it's like
no.
this is not a book for a 10-year-old. Like I, I don't, and I wonder. I question the psychology of that. Like, did he just assume that like I don't know, maybe he assumed it was like scary stories to tell before bed, like because I
Yeah.
think that's most the average person, their engagement with horror literature, and this is no shade on those books because I love those books,
Mhm.
but their engagement with horror literature probably began and ended with things like scary stories to tell before bed and like Goosebumps, the stuff you
Yeah.
get at the Scholastic Book Fair, which, hey, those are great books. Again,
Absolutely.
no shade. Those are amazing and like very formative. But it's like it does feel like for the average person who maybe has never read horror before, they assume all horror is like that. Maybe they've read Stephen King,
Yeah.
but if they had read Stephen King, they'd know that some horror is like
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Stephen King. Stephen, you know what? I'm not gonna throw any shade because he might be listening. Who knows?
How neat would that be? Like he's just listening.
But hey, Steve.
Like we know you're checking in on this.
Yeah, yeah, of course. He's always listening.
Yeah.
No, this isn't talking scared, but it could be.
Yeah. One day, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Like, come on, jump on
Maybe
here, Steven.
one
Let's
day
elevate my
we
profile.
maybe one day we will be the elusive megastars who can change people's careers just by noticing them.
See, that's what I want. Like, just want to be the person that's just like, hey, somebody should read this, and like, boom,
Well,
you've
yeah,
created
and I
somebody.
actually wonder, does Stephen King just like have a dartboard with like that an assistant puts a bunch of like random writers' names on, and he just throws a dart and he's like, "That's the writer whose book I'm going to shout out on social media today." Because the most recent beneficiary of that was Keith Rossum,
Yeah,
which that was I got like secondhand glee just watching that whole thing unfold, just seeing like, oh man, he's gonna eat.
yeah, because it's like
He's gonna eat.
it's like you're seeing happen to somebody who's like in our circle, and it's like
Yeah.
sort of, it's like, hey,
Well, I mean, he's published. I mean, to be fair, I think the book was published with like what was his book? It's like a major. It's like a big. What are we at? Big four, big five, big three? What?
big
How many
big
are left?
four, maybe big three eventually.
Big three and a half, we'll say.
Yeah,
Because it feels like the next shoe was going to drop on that. But yeah, like I think it's like it's one of those things where it helps to be published by like a big publisher. But I think I've
yeah,
also seen Stephen King like pick up just like indie books too. It
yeah,
happens. Yeah. Um, but it's like just, like so many things in publishing, it's just a matter of luck. A lot of it is just like Christopher Paolini, who wrote the Aragon books. Well,
yeah,
okay, that's part luck. Partly it's luck that Carl Hyacin happened to find his like self-published book. But it also helped that his like parents had a publishing company.
yeah,
So, you know, some people get a little push.
yeah. That's always that little asterisk when somebody's like, they're a self-made person. It's like, did their parents have money? Like,
A
did their parents
small
have money?
loan, a small loan of $1 million
Yeah,
from Mumsy.
I feel like that's always anytime somebody's like, oh, they made it on their own. They dropped out of college, went in the garage. Like, did their parents have money?
Yeah, my mother-in-law actually she went to high school with Jeff Bezos, and to hear her say it, yeah, he was just like a rich little shit, just a rich little Palmetto Bay kid.
I mean, when he took his like rocket ship up with William Shatner's all like overwhelmed by the glory of what he saw, and then Jeff Bezos is just spraying people with champagne. It's like, oh, you're just
Yeah. Well, that was actually really interesting because Shatner afterwards he said a lot of things, and they were all like characteristic of Shatner, very interesting things. And I remember one of the things he said was that he wished everyone could do this, and this should be something that everyone could should do. I think he also said that it was depressing.
yeah, yeah. He said it
He
like
said it was
broke
depressing
him.
because it was like, what can I do from now? Like, what's there left to do?
Yeah. So somehow
Yeah,
get
so
a
make it
cameo in one of
happen.
these new Star Trek shows. He's somehow not able to do that. I think he's a little bitter about it.
Yeah. Well, Shatner.
I love him, but like, man, I think I have some issues of tech war that like I got like back in the day when you buy comic books and they'd be like a big bundle of them and they'd always throw in a couple tech wars. It's like a Spider-Man on the front and then like four tech wars behind it.
Oh boy. Yeah. I have a friend who's constantly quoting this line from one of the Tech War novels. I've never read a Tech War, any of the Tech War, but this line is burned into my brain, and it's "No, senor," said the robot pimp disdainfully, and that's like one of the greatest sentences that's ever been written. Just like out of context, in context, doesn't matter. "No, senor," said the robot pimp disdainfully. And I think it's the disdainfully part that
Yeah.
really sells,
Have I
because
been
otherwise,
missing
it's like,
out? Do I need to gather all of these up?
yeah. Just take an already crazy line and add an unnecessary adverb to the end of it. That's the formula to gold.
And I've always heard his Star Trek novels are the same way. It's basically Kirk is the greatest at everything all the time, always. And it just goes to levels you wouldn't even expect. That's always the thing I need to check out.
Yeah, I I'll be honest. I don't like that Kirk's like as a I like so Kirk as a captain. We're getting like way off topic here, but like Kirk as a captain is like we're constantly told that he's this really brilliant, smart guy, and like then we see, and I blame it on Shatner's performance because Shatner, I don't think he has many great things, but he's never really been cerebral. He's a very physical actor, and you see that physicality and like that sort of raw emotion in his all of his roles. And this is not me like I don't I'm not one of those people who thinks that Shatner's a bad actor because I
Yeah,
think he's actually a very good actor. He was Shatner, I would say, was his generation's Nicolas Cage in the sense that
yeah,
he was a very good actor who took roles that may not have always been the best. And he would always, go balls to the wall with his performances.
yeah.
And
Like Kingdom
sometimes,
of the Spiders. Like he
yeah,
didn't have to go all out for Kingdom of the Spiders, but he did.
yeah. Yeah, and but what I will say is that like yeah, I don't buy the what like the Star Trek is all like the writing is trying to tell us that Kirk is like this smart cerebral person. It's like no, he thinks with his dick. That is his entire character. He thinks with his dick and his heart. The brain does not get involved. The
Yeah,
brain is not consulted. That is I've also seen some very interesting like feminist critiques of Kirk as a character that he's more in that James Bond mold of a womanizer who does not respect women fundamentally.
yeah,
Because there are womanizers who do actually like and respect women in fiction. I don't think Kirk is one of them. Whereas Picard, well, granted, not a womanizer, does like and respect women. And I will also say Riker, improvement on Kirk because Riker
yeah.
does like and respect women.
It's always
Yeah,
like an
I don't know.
interesting.
What were we
di-
talking about?
I don't know, because now it's Star Trek. So now it's like you said, Shatner's this interesting thing between what the text tells us, because they even describe him in like the first season, like someone that knows. I think it's like Gary what's like describes him as like, oh, he was a walking stack of books, and like like I
Yeah,
said, the
no,
text
no, yeah.
tells us he's cerebral stuff like that, but the performance is like you said, he's a man ruled by two things, and the brain is not one of them.
And I think in fairness, I think the other part of that is that he's also always next to Spock. And
Yeah,
next to Spock, you're never going to seem cerebral
yeah,
because like you're going to seem emotional and kind of like carnal if you're next to someone like Spock. Well, him and
yeah,
McCoy also being like uh what is McCoy's deal exactly? I guess grouchy.
yeah. I think he saw too much in the Klingon War, and so he's grouchy, he's angry, he's got no time for anybody.
Okay, you know what? One last thing, because I don't think we should spend all our time talking about Star Trek, but I am still, like years later, I'm upset that they canceled Enterprise just before they got to the Earth Romulan War.
I know, like,
Like it was just finding its feet. And actually, I'm gonna say it, Star Trek Enterprise might be my favorite. I like Deep Space Nine is a better story overall. Voyager or not Voyager, uh Next Generation is probably the best show to just like, watch, to just kind of
yeah,
like watch as like a show that's on or like binge. Voyager is it's there. But Enterprise, I think I don't know, I just really liked Enterprise because it felt more real. And
yeah,
maybe it's
and
like the uniforms actually looked like something. They didn't just look like pajamas.
yeah,
I would say
like a
even like
military.
yeah, they looked like real uniforms. It felt like I actually believed that they were on a spaceship.
Yeah, and it was
Um,
that early era, and that's what I always was just interested in was the point between Zephyr Cochrane going into space and meeting bringing the Vulcans to Earth essentially, and then like we fixed our shit in a generation. Like I'd love to
yeah.
see that. Like that's one thing I would love to see. Like how that happened. The Vulcans show up and we're in the afterward World War IV and we're just or World War III. I can't remember, and we're just
Well, even before that, there's a lot of episodes that show that Earth was just really bad in the 21st century in general.
yeah,
That like there was constant. It was like like
the Bell
somehow
riots.
somehow worse than what we're living through now.
Yeah,
Because they imagine it would be like I don't think they imagined all the problems we have, but they imagined that like our cities would be just overcrowded and like kind of honestly what Republicans think we're living through right now is what
yeah, yeah,
the actually happens in the Star Trek universe. There's just like uncontrollable crime and just social decay and upheaval, and then finally a nuclear war.
yeah,
But yeah, you're right. It doesn't actually make a lot of. I mean, I figure the Vulcans did a lot of heavy lifting.
yeah,
Um, but that's actually, if actually to go back to my writing, there I have a sci-fi story that I like a sci-fi universe that I've written a few stories set in it, like had a couple published, but like never any long form. But the main idea I have for this is that essentially humanity gets discovered by a alien polity, we'll say, who essentially run like they're like the hegemonic power in our part of the galaxy, and they spend about 100 years watching us until they finally realize, and they're watching us, and they're like, they can't be this stupid. They can't be this stupid. And then they finally have to step in and save us from global climate catastrophe. But they're not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts because their long-term plan is to basically economically colonize us, which again they find shockingly easy.
Yeah.
Uh, but the whole idea, but basically they debate for a long time whether they should step in. It's like no, they'll figure it out, and like they're not figuring it out.
Yeah.
They just see the acid levels and like the CO2 levels constantly rising. You know, the acidification of the oceans get worse. They're like, this is, how are they not stopping it? And then they finally step in. Um, but that's just part of it. There's, it's like everything else I write, it's very, very complicated.
Yeah, which I appreciate. I don't know, I enjoy this more interesting, like than having anything be just be totally black and white, especially
Yeah.
sci-fi.
Sci-fi, I struggle, and I struggle too with sci-fi because it feels like sci-fi is like it feels like an arms race. And this isn't a bad thing. I think it's really interesting, but it does feel like contemporary sci-fi has become a conceptual arms race. That you need to have like a really cool, like unheard of high concept idea
Yeah.
for every story.
Yeah, you gotta have
Um,
this hook that just like one
yeah,
sentence, like this is what this is about, and
yeah, which maybe it always was like that. Maybe it always was, and like maybe I'm not giving enough credit to like Heinlein and Bradbury. Like and like Asimov, that maybe they were also like, maybe it was really hard back then to come up with these hooks. Although I do feel like there were a lot of stories that were just like, what if radiation?
yeah.
What if radiation, but too much? What
That's
if
what's fun
alien,
is
but too much?
like reading Kurt Vonnegut's book, and he always has Kilgore Trout, and he'll have his like high concept, bizarro sci-fi stories, and then you look at the stuff
Mhm.
from the era, from the 60s, 70s. Like, I mean, honestly, he was barely a parody, really,
Yeah,
pretty much
I think
doing
we
what they were
also
doing.
forget that there's a lot. There were a lot of bad sci-fi authors too at that time, like Philip Jose Farmer.
Yeah,
Though he wasn't really forgotten. I think it's this funny thing where he's kind of remembered because he was kind of bad.
yeah.
Well, he's he's remembered largely because of how like horny his stories were, but also that they were kind of bad.
But it's that thing of like, we talked about the review that hurt you the most was that it was okay or it was just forgettable. It's like, you know what, you're either gonna be Ray Bradbury, Phil
Yeah,
Joseph Farmer. You don't want to be in the middle. You don't want to be
yeah. I
like,
will say
because that's
I
who's
talk a lot
forgotten.
of I talk a lot of shit about writers, other writers, and I'm also very thin-skinned, so I'm just like the ultimate hypocrite. So
I mean, we all.
I don't like I try not to talk shit, but it just slips out sometimes. And to be fair, most of the people I've talked shit about are either like way too famous to ever pay attention to what I'm saying or dead.
Yeah. So yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't talk shit about like people who might actually hear about it.
Yeah.
That's just not a good idea. It's
No,
also
because
mean.
yeah, yeah, it's mean. It never looks good, and also like I feel like then all of a sudden you've opened yourself up for criticism, and like,
Yeah.
and
Please don't
I'm
criticize.
also thin skinned. Like I can't.
Please don't criticize me. I can't take it.
That's what's like. It's like, please don't be mean to me. I'm doing the best I can.
What do you say fuck me for?
um. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. This was
Yeah.
awesome, and yeah,
I had a lot of fun.
anybody watching, listening, check out, pick up the collection. Have you seen the Moon Tonight? It's awesome. And
And
hopefully
other
we'll see
rumors.
those other two collections out there soon.
Hey, yeah,
Fingers
fingers
crossed.
crossed.
All right,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.